Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Social Web TV, the internet TV show that answers the question, who owns your data? With these two simple words, you do. And what a special show for a big, big week. We are on location at Google.
In the middle of Google land,
Yeah.
site of many campfire. One, among other things.
I'm rejoined by Joseph and David. I'm not out here all alone.
Welcome back, David.
Yeah, you too.
You've been on the road for a while.
And we have special guest from Google, Erich Sachs.
Thanks
Welcome.
for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course. Thanks
Have
for
some
joining
fun.
us.
Well, this is an enormous week for opening up the social web.
Maybe one of the biggest we've ever had.
Practically a tsunami.
That's
We've
a good thing,
got a big week for OpenID with Microsoft and Google both becoming providers.
though. More on that in a second.
Yep, that's why we've got Erich on the show. It's been a big week for Open Social, which is nearing its 1-year anniversary, and we had 2 sites go live this week.
Yahoo with the full release of YOS 1.0, including the much anticipated Yahoo application platform, or YAP, as
Yep.
we'd like to call it.
And then also LinkedIn with their intelligent application platform, which we actually shipped an application on top of for all those bloggers out there.
That's
You
six,
now-
six apart.
Yeah,
Yep.
6 apart.
And what I loved about that was it actually gets your homepage off your existing LinkedIn profile and finds the RSS feed and starts sharing your
Yeah,
blog articles.
It
It's
actually
like-
uses, so it's pretty
It's really
interesting.
equals me, like-
well, it uses Google JavaScript feed APIs to do all of it. So it's like Open Social plus the feed APIs. If only we hosted it on App Engine, it would be Google through and through.
It's amazing. And cool to see, even though with LinkedIn, it's not like anybody can go run an app there, they kind of control who goes there, but they still chose to use Open Social as the building blocks so that developers don't have to learn yet another set of technologies to work with them. So a neat kind of twist on how that's all played out.
Very cool. 2 other pieces of news before we jump into the big story. New York Times, we've talked about here before, has been rolling out a series of APIs. Today they opened up a really cool one, which is full access to their repository of movie reviews. So 22,000 New York Times movie reviews now available for mashup with any kind of website out there. Very cool.
Maybe we should use that with our Netflix integration. You say you rate a video and it's like, here's the synopsis.
Yeah, New York Times has been doing a bunch of interesting stuff the past
They're
few
on a
months.
roll, yeah. Open going mainstream, what can we say?
Yeah.
And then also, what was a surprise to many of us, Chris Messina discovered this last week, that Microsoft just rolled out a new toolkit for micro formats called Oomph.
Oomph.
What the heck is that?
Yeah, it's a set of tools that they got excited about for microformats, which we've talked about before. So there's an Internet Explorer add-on that lets you see all the microformats in web pages. There's some little JavaScript and CSS that lets you build cool things with microformats in your pages and format them. I think there's a Windows Live Writer, which is their blog authoring tool, plugin that lets you use microformats. So just kind of a bunch of stuff of them playing with it, and a lot of very laudatory things to say about microformats and how they're good for the web. And so,
And probably also building on the microformat support that they're building into Internet Explorer 8.
right.
And David and I were down in Los Angeles this week at Digital Hollywood, along with Mark Cantor and a few other folks.
Alan Herf, a bunch of previous guests of this show.
Yep. And someone from Microsoft, and there was a lot of question about why Microsoft would go open, and there was a Microsoft person in the audience, I didn't get his name, but he said the main reason is that their customers are demanding it. They don't necessarily call it open, but the customers are saying, we want interoperability. We have an enterprise that has lots of different stuff in it, and we need the stuff to work together, and that's what's leading Microsoft further and further down this open path.
Well, and then that afternoon, Mark and I went over to Microsoft's Professional Developers Conference, which was also happening at the same time in Los Angeles. And I mean, just throughout all of the sessions and really in the expo hall as well, that theme of interoperability was really apparent.
Yeah.
Talking more and more about how to use APIs to interact with Microsoft services and starting to do it in a more standard fashion.
Yeah.
Cool. So now let's get into the big news of the week. Google
All right,
has
let's do it.
jumped in and become an OpenID provider. How they got there will be an interesting story. Joseph, I know Plaxo's one of the first sites to be up live as a relying party.
Yep.
So
As of 1 a.m. last night, or this morning.
as usual, Joseph pulling a late night coding feverishly. So welcome, Erich.
Yep.
Let's get into it. Joseph, you want to lead it off?
Well, yeah, I guess maybe first sort of talk a little bit about sort of what you've released today and what you sort of chose to build as starting out.
Sure. So what Google released today is an OpenID identity provider. Honestly, not too much different than what Yahoo and AOL have had for a while. One of the differences is that based on a lot of feedback from the community and from potential mainstream websites who we hope will become relying parties, we're offering relying parties like Plaxo the ability to request the user's email address as well. And if the user consents, we'll actually provide that as a piece of information back to sites like Plaxo. And do you want to give an idea of why that's so valuable for the user experience?
It's very cool. A couple of reasons. One is, if you come to Plaxo and you want to sign up and you've already got, say, a Gmail account, you can just say, hey, let me use my Google account, my Gmail password. Don't make me create a different Plaxo account. And because Google owns your Gmail address, they can tell us, hey, trust me, this really is jsmarr@gmail.com. And so we don't have to send you a separate round trip email to confirm that you really are that person. We can just take you right into Pulse. So that's a nice kind of thing for users. It's always a pain to have to say, yes, for the 1,000th time, I really am jsmarr@gmail.com. And if you're already a Plaxo user and you've maybe already got that email address on your account, we can just match you up and take you into Plaxo right away. So even if you've never used OpenID or don't know what it is, you can really just say to Plaxo, hey, look, I've already used Google, just make it work. And we really can now make it work because the data is flowing. So very exciting.
And then also being able to start changing user sign-up experiences. So instead of having that form be type your email address twice and then you can't use our website until you go check your email and click a link to verify your account, through this OpenID flow with Google's OpenID provider, being able to have a user sign in, have the correct email address come over if the user wants it to, and then the site actually know that that is the user's email address without having to do that entire sort of email dance back and forth.
Right, so very cool there.
And our focus has really been on usability. So I'm a 5-year-old Googler here. Before coming to Google, I was in the enterprise identity space for a long time. And I came to Google mostly to learn about usability. I got to work for Marissa Meyer, who's the genius in this space. And to be honest, it took me about a year to learn, well, I'm nowhere close to her level, but at least I can learn some things. And to be honest, for years now, we've been looking at federated login. We've tried a couple different options, and honestly, they didn't work well. Users just couldn't understand them. And so we're trying some different approaches now. We're not sure if this is going to be the right thing, but as an example, Yahoo released some user research that helped give some guidelines to identity providers like us about how to make our part of the experience simpler. And so we really took that to heart. We've tried to get our pages as simple as possible, but let's give Facebook some credit. They've done some great work here. They're doing some work with pop-ups, even simpler, and we're going to have to experiment and see what approaches on the IDP side will work well. But there's still some really hard problems on the relying party side in terms of getting this adopted. And maybe y'all can talk about. Y'all have had a lot more experience in that area than we have. So
yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges is, and I wrote about this on Monday on O'Reilly Radar when I was writing about Microsoft releasing their community technology preview for their OpenID provider. And sort of at the end said, like, up to this point, we've been measuring OpenID's success in the number of OpenIDs that are out there or the number of websites that support it. But we're sort of getting to a point where we need to measure it differently. We need to measure it around how are people, and sort of getting more and more towards mainstream users, able to understand how to use OpenID, what it does, why is it beneficial, being able to deal with sort of security concerns as OpenID becomes used for more things than around the web.
I mean, if you take it back, it's kind of amazing, right? We're about to have the Internet Identity Workshop again in a couple of weeks. And it was last year around that time that the OpenID 2.0 spec got finalized in the first place, right? So here we are less than a year later. And back then, it was a bunch of kind of scrappy grassroots people trying to put something together that wasn't vendor lock-in. And there was a big question mark as to, could we ever get any of the mainstream people to support it, right? And here it is less than a year later, and we've got Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, AOL, soon to be MySpace. I mean, these are the biggest names around, all jumping on board. And so I think we've really sort of gotten a check mark on that first phase of, does anybody care? Can we get anything going? And now we really are in that second phase of how can we really streamline the user experience? How can we start to share richer data? I mean, let's remember how this all started, right? Everybody comes to their new site and the first thing they do is scrape their Gmail address book down to get all their contacts, because you need the data to do anything interesting, right? And so we're finally about ready to get there with this full open stack of being able to do that same thing that users want to do, but in a secure way, a way that makes sense, a way that you don't have to recode a different one for Google and for Yahoo and for everybody else, right? It all sort of, so just amazing to see the progress we've come when you step back.
Now, one thing though that's an interesting backstory here, regular viewers of our show probably would think, oh, Google's become an OpenID provider. That might have taken some time, but of course that's inevitable. But the reality is, this project didn't necessarily start by how do we become an OpenID provider. So maybe give us a little bit of the background of and the pathway you took.
Sure, so just was talking about a year ago, and honestly, that's about when this started. I actually joined the Google security team as their product manager a year ago, and one of the things that was happening at that time was Google, actually, we weren't working with OpenID, but we have an enterprise email outsourcing service. We call it Google Apps Your Domain, and in that case, we do act as a relying party for federated login to a lot of these enterprises who want to run their own password validation system. Same thing with schools and ISPs, et cetera. But we were getting to the point where now, tens and soon hundreds and now even thousands of those domains wanted to run their own IDP. And on our side, we had to find a scalable approach so that users could, come to their corporate email and log in at Google's website. And to be honest, the approaches that we were trying weren't working very well at that point. So our usability team in this enterprise group, not thinking all about consumers, said, how do we work on this problem? And we were looking at a bunch of different approaches, funny enough, not doing very well. Around that same time, some of the vendors who use Google Checkout in the e-commerce arena, completely different group, started complaining, hey, now we got these, Google Checkout button, the PayPal button, the let me get credit on the fly button, and they're complaining all these buttons are next to their login boxes. And so we were looking at that problem and stumbled across, funny enough, Buy.com's website. They're a website, that most of us know, but go take a look at their login box. It's not the traditional username password, a little bit different, ask you to enter your email address, and then two options, do you have a password or don't you? Well, we found that if we took that login box, few wording changes, and gave it to average user, we found average users could go to a site, enter their email address and say, no, I don't have a password here, and get bounced to, in our enterprise case, their corporate environment to actually verify their identity. And so, we took those learnings from Buy.com and said, hey, here's a model that's 90% proven. We just need to tweak it a little bit. And we released some usability results after, honestly, probably 9 months of research of, tuning this. And, this may not be the final approach that works, but, the industry's been trying other options. We've been trying buttons, for example, and both Google's research, Yahoo's research, and others have shown users don't notice these. It's hard to scale. And so we want to work with the community to find out what is going to work here.
Yeah, and this was something, there was the OpenID Usability Summit a week or two ago. John, you were talking with Alan about that last week. I think sort of part of that trend there of, since this isn't a technology which is coming from any one company or a small group of companies being mandated, this is how you do it, it allows all sorts of different people from within the community to try different things out, to work together and sort of build on what each other has done, has found works, has found doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yep. And let me add another big doesn't work here. It's just actually an area we're going to try to spend a lot of time on with the community in the coming months. So I mentioned this enterprise outsourcing thing where we do federated login. Well, one of our experiences from that is those enterprises can't use our rich client apps. I've got my BlackBerry device here. It's got this great Gmail application for it. Well, it asks me for my username and password. And if Google doesn't know your password, if only your enterprise does, you can't use that app. That tends to make enterprises pretty upset. So one of our big problems is, how are we as Google going to make sure our rich client apps work with federated login, both with our enterprise customers immediately, who are just beating us up about it.
Yep.
And if we can find some models that work longer term, hopefully it'll work for our consumers. And Joseph and I were even talking this problem that Blackso can face.
Absolutely, right? Like people have our Outlook plugin, our Mac plugin, our different downloads, and our iPhone versions, whatever kind of stuff, people need to be able to use this stuff. And I think that's a classic example of how this same problem in the enterprise and the consumer space, those people don't usually talk to one another, and yet they've got exactly the same set of problems and exactly potentially the same set of solutions. And Google's this sort of interesting middle case because Gmail, a very popular consumer app, also trying to get it adopted in the enterprise, and so they really do have to face this intersection head on. And to this point of David saying that since this is all open, it's not some Google proprietary thing, it's not secretive, and in fact, they can share the results openly. Yahoo's sharing the results openly. We've now got essentially the best minds in the industry all collectively working together on that, and that's why you're seeing this acceleration of progress. And so I think that's exactly when we talk about why open tends to win in the long term. It's exactly those kinds of trends that we're starting to see emerge now. So it's very exciting.
And what's also interesting for me is if we look at some of these problems of, okay, allow access on my BlackBerry to my account, as well as I log into Plaxo or another website and I want to access my contacts, like some of the technologies underneath making that happen can be shared.
Absolutely.
And I think that's another really interesting piece here of going back, looking at that open stack of technologies, where if you're starting to combine OpenID and OAuth together, not only can a user log in, say who they are, in this case exchange their email address as well, but start to grant access to some form of a protected resource. On your phone, that might be to your email account. To Plaxo, it might be that you're a new user, you sign up for Plaxo, you don't have to verify your email address because it's passed in through OpenID. Plaxo now knows that you have a Google account, and so they could use OAuth to make a portable contacts request to Google to not have to go and scrape the address book using a password. So starting to look at, well, and not look at, but actually start to see in a realistic time frame how these technologies will get combined together to really make user experiences much better on the web as well as on other devices.
There's the open stack, right? In that example I was talking about, these rich client programs where people can't use them today, we are very much looking at OAuth as the approach. In fact, at this UX Summit, we showed a prototype of using OAuth for the style, and a great thing about it is it actually works both with a user who then is identified via SAML or via OpenID. It's sort of agnostic to the whole approach. That's the power. And Joseph and I were also talking about other work that's going on to combine OpenID and OAuth, so that, for example, a user can go to Plaxo, say I'm a Gmail user. When they get sent to Google, the goal in the future is Google asks the user, hey, can I share your email address with Plaxo? Can I tell them who they are? Do you want them to see your contacts? Do you want them to see your calendar, etc.? The user shouldn't have to go through 4 steps to do all that. That should be one simple step.
It's funny because normally you're sort of taught that security and convenience are kind of trade-offs with one another, right? If you want to make something more secure, you got to kind of put up more barriers and make it harder to use. This is a case where we're going to be able to make things more secure, more interoperable, and easier for actual users to use. We're going to be able to do things that are better than the sort of hacky way they've been done in the past. And like you say, this is no longer a fantasy. I mean, this is exactly what MySpace is talking about working on. This is exactly what Yahoo's talking about working on. This is mentioned in the Google post today as well. So it's just amazing to see this all sort of coming together.
Yeah.
Well, it's really exciting to see some of the stuff that's down the roadmap, not too far distant future. But it's also interesting to note this is a state-of-the-art implementation, and I know you spent some special late-night hours working on some new pieces. One attribute exchange, I guess. We haven't talked much about that, if at all, on the show before.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So it's sort of funny how there's all these different building blocks all kind of floating around, and people become aware of them. And I remember there was a period of time in earlier days of OAuth when kind of everybody had decided OAuth was the thing that was going to take off. But if you looked around, no one had actually shipped any OAuth code. It was kind of like, oh yeah, OAuth. It's like, I can't even point, like, can I see a demo of OAuth? It's like, well, not, And I felt like attribute exchange had kind of been in that way for a while. It's an extension to OpenID that when you're logging into a site, you can also pass some information. So it might be basic profile information. It might be, is this person over age? Does this person have a certain amount of money in his credit card account? Sort of any kind of attribute. And what's even cooler is you can actually store those back at your provider. So a classic example might be, maybe I can go to the government and get a thing that says, yes, Joseph really is a California resident and he's over 18 or whatever. And then I could go to some other place and hand them that piece of information. Or, if PayPal updates my information or eBay updates my reputation, that could kind of flow back. But again, it's sort of a lot talked about, and not too many people had actually implemented it. And so, Google comes along and they say, well, we want to be able to start sharing this data, and it's an open spec, it's out there. And so they were able to pick it up and use it. And then at Plaxo, we said, okay, Google's using attribute exchange. We haven't done that before. And it was a Friday afternoon, and I was like, oh, okay, I got to look this up. The spec's online. You sort of read through it. Again, it's very simple, like most of these specs. And I literally had the code up and running, by dinner time. And so that is the proof point, I think, when these
Don't try this at home.
Fair enough. But that's really the power of it, right? There just wasn't that much complexity to it. It wasn't a boil the ocean kind of approach. And it's this small pieces loosely joined approach, right? Attribute exchange does that piece of it well. It lives in the existing OpenID ecosystem. So it really was just a little tweak. And I mean, that to me was a real kind of proof point of, wow, this stuff really can work and really can work in a flexible way.
Right. Well, and really going back to that idea of a stack, small pieces loosely joined, just that point that Google can go and use OpenID plus OAuth or SAML plus OAuth. I mean,
Yep. And we spend a lot of time talking about how these things work in the social. We're using a lot of these same technologies in other applications. I talked about the enterprise scenario. Another one is Google Health. This whole, who owns their personal health records? You do.
Yeah,
right? And we're using the exact same technology.
I smell
stack.
spin-off.
The sequel.
Yeah.
Well, we're running a little long on time, but I think this is such a meaty topic. I don't mind if we do run a little longer. I know one meme that I saw emerge in some of the reaction today was, oh great, another big company becomes an OpenID provider, but is not a relying party. So we're in this kind of in-between state right now. Anyone want to comment on where we're at and how we're thinking about that? Or I don't want to put you on the spot around future plans, but...
So, one of the things I mentioned is we are a relying party in the SAML case, in the enterprise case, and to be honest, we're having problems with our implementation, specifically these rich client apps. That's killer for us. Google, we're in the cloud, but people have these mobile devices. They have Apple TVs, talking to YouTube, et cetera. We have got to solve that problem before a lot of websites can really commit to, becoming a relying party. We can't make the experience worse for users and tell them, great, you can get rid of your password, just get rid of your BlackBerry too. That's not going to fly.
Yeah. But can you imagine a future even where someone with a Yahoo OpenID might be able to walk up and use a Google property?
Well, Mitch Ford, a lot of ISPs in schools, you walk up to Google today, you enter your school email address, password on their site, and boom, you're into Google. You got email, you got calendar. So I think we're already a long part of the way there. In terms of doing with, these other providers, sure, I think there's a potential for that. We just got to figure out what are these last few pieces. Funny enough, because the technology hasn't been as highly adopted, I don't think we've seen all of the problems that need to be solved on the relying party side. There may be a few more gotchas. Let's find out what they are, find out quick, and help other relying parties, tell them what the best practices are.
And stuff's really getting fun now. I mean, since you have AOL and Yahoo and Google and Microsoft with
and
all
soon to be MySpace,
and soon to be MySpace. But if you look at, largest companies on the internet,
right,
with the most number of users around the world, they now all have OpenIDs.
Yeah, this question. If you ask about the chicken and egg problem of providers and consumers, well, if you're a would-be OpenID relying party, the first question is, how many of my users even have an OpenID? Well, the answer now is probably all of them, or certainly the vast majority of them, right? And the second question is, okay, is this like a totally geeky thing? Are they going to be able to actually figure it out? Well, now you've got, Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, MySpace. These companies all have incredibly mainstream users and an incredible commitment to building mainstream usable stuff. They're all working on it. That's what we've been talking about, right? And now, that's going to all of a sudden mean that becoming a relying party, especially when you can start to get more of this rich data like we were talking about, is just going to become a no-brainer, and not because you necessarily care about openness and user control and some of the more ideological aspects of it, but just because you're going to have a better sign-up completion rate. You're going to get more data in your account. You're going to have higher engagement, and your competitor's doing it, and they're getting the bump, and you're going to have to do it. And so I really do feel like it's a mistake if people are poo-pooing this sort of, more providers, not enough consumers. That's the natural evolution of things, and it's exactly the way you'd want to see things go. Once there were a lot of sites, publishing RSS feeds, there was plenty of people who wanted to go make Google Reader, right? Vice versa would not have been the case. So I think we're seeing the same thing here.
Yeah, and especially as more of this data starts to get in there, being able to go and combine OpenID with access to other information, it's going to become more and more compelling for sites to start accepting OpenID logins.
Right. Cool. Well, anything else people want to cover in this episode? I think we might have to do a sequel.
Yes, part 2.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Erich, for coming on board. Congratulations on the launch.
Thanks, guys.
And look forward to seeing more
And
stuff.
thanks, Joseph, for becoming our first big RP, along with Zoho and Luxfer.
Cool. Well, join us next week. I assure you it's going to just get even crazier from here out. It looks like the tail end of the year is going to be action-packed.
Well, got Web 2.0 Summit next week.
And then Internet Identity Workshop, we got
Widget
Workshop. Summit, Snap, we had this week.
All sorts of stuff.
Lots coming. So come back here, not Google Campus, to this show for another exciting episode of The Social Web TV!